PhD student. My advisor is Rodrigo Fonseca. I work on quality of service. You can't hear me? Oh, the microphone is almost in my mouth right now. My advisor is Rodrigo Fonseca. I work on quality of service in distributed systems and software-defined networking. Thanks for the great talk. So my question is about democratizing the internet. So Akamai hasn't really been embroiled in net neutrality too much, since clearly Akamai plays a large role in decongesting the internet. So supposing that you're right about challenge number one, that the congestion in the backbone networks is becoming more of a problem, I should say, then it seems realistic that more and more people will need to rely on having a content delivery network. So if I'm the next Facebook, at some point maybe I will want to make my own CDN like Facebook has. So in this context, how do you think software patents might present a threat to the democratic internet, given that Akamai presently kind of holds the keys to the kingdom in this regard, since they are obviously one of the most prolific content delivery networks?
Okay, so Facebook does have their own CDN. We deliver a lot of Facebook traffic and content, so most of the pictures you get from Facebook would come from us. I think really only the very biggest companies, maybe a half a dozen, maybe less, can they even afford to think about creating a CDN. And even then, I think most of the ones that do over time discover that it doesn't keep up, that they're better off handing that task over to a company where that's their main core mission. You know, Facebook's core mission is not CDN, for example. It's social networking and the work there. So I think that happens. Now, I think patents are worthwhile to allow inventors and people with good ideas, a lot of the folks here, to get those ideas protected, and I think it can help them commercialize those ideas. If you're starting a company and you can't protect your intellectual property, it can be harder to get funding because the person who's putting the funding in will want to be sure that the company can grow without a bigger company just say, oh, that's a good idea, and just stealing it. Because the bigger company is going to have an edge on the little company. So I think software patents have the ability to actually help with innovation. There's patent trolls and things like that, which are painful for the big companies, and I think that's a bad thing. But at the end of the day, that doesn't mean we should throw out the patent system. On balance, I think it helps entrepreneurs, it helps innovation.
Do you think at this point in time it's feasible for anyone to come and actually start competing with Akamai to build a legitimate content delivery network?
Oh, we have dozens of competitors. Startups all the time. In fact, the bigger we get, the more venture capitalists will fund more startups. Because they say, hey, that's a good business model, and we're earning, $2 billion a year. And so say, all I want is 10%, and they'll fund a startup. So there are dozens of startups. So, now, are some of them, copying what we do? Yes. We don't like it. It's different if a startup copies us versus a giant copies us. We'd like that less. And in fact, we did have a case go to the Supreme Court, which is now, I understand, taught in all the law schools, and is still being resolved and may well end up back at the Supreme Court over what's called divided infringement. And the issue is that, say you have a patent and you got an invention, you've got a claim that says you do these 5 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if somebody does all those same 5 steps, then they've infringed the patent, and that's a bad thing. But what if somebody does steps 1 through 4 and then gets their buddy to do step 5? That's called divided infringement. Between the two of them, they infringed. Well, can you hold the first one liable? And so we have a situation like that where one of our competitors did exactly that. And they even got a contract, with the person doing the 5th step. And we won the case, and the jury awarded us over $50 million and said, got to stop, these other guys got to stop. And these always get appealed, but during the appeal process, the federal appellate court that specializes in patents changed the rules. They said, wait a minute, No, you have to do all 5. If you work with somebody to do the 5th, you can't hold the person responsible for the first 4, which is sort of nutty because that gives you a way to get around any patent where you have to do a series of steps. So it went up to the Supreme Court, but they did I'm now a cynic about how the legal system works, but it went up to the Supreme Court on a bizarre thing so that I wanted to have the Supreme Court vote against us because I didn't like how they set it up, which the Supreme Court did, 9-0 against us. Back to the appellate court, and just yesterday we lost there, which we knew we were going to do, 2-1, but we got a great minority opinion, which serves as the basis to go back up to get it right at the Supreme Court. You know, because you got to fix this issue of divided infringement, or no patent can be enforced. So it's the patent world is complicated right now with this issue.
All right, thank you. I liked your quote earlier where you said, people have no idea about legislating technology, which totally makes sense.
Yeah, you want technologists solving technology problems. Generally, that works out better.
Thank you.
All right, my name is Hammurabi Menges. I work with Maurice Herlihy here in the CS department of Brown. I work with Byzantine protocols. My question is also related somehow to the democratization of the internet. You mentioned that the aggregated edge capacity of the internet could or can possibly be used so we can do this sort of a more interesting content delivery system for the users. But again, considering your example of the World Cup, in the next World Cup, we can expect that more and more developing countries will be streaming the media over the internet. And the scenario in these countries seem to be different. The edge capacity in these countries are not exactly the same as they are in the developing countries. The cell phone networks, they use sometimes bizarre techniques and technologies and billing plans. And some governments impose censorship, but basically on everything, and some others wouldn't allow you to have a piece of software operated by a company like Akamai in their homes that could theoretically mean something else. Mm-hmm. So what is your view on this democratization of the access, allowing these people who are not in this environment of the edge capacity, they don't have this last mile access, and what is also your technical perspective on how to manage the censorship and impositions that governments do? How does that relate to the company?
All right, so 2 very different questions. You're absolutely right. So we focus on the 400 million people, or the lines, where you are well connected, as do most of the major web companies. But most of the world is going to, in terms of users, is going to connect through cellular in the emerging world. And it's very different. And I had just this conversation with a senior media CEO in India, and very polite, but basically, if you read between the politeness, what he was saying was, you big Western companies just don't get it, referring to us, we're medium-sized, but Google and the other ones. He said, you're running around talking about 4K video and Blu-ray video over IP, at tens of megabits a second. He says, that's useful for about 0.5% of my viewership. The sweet spot here, if you want to reach the billions of people, is you need to figure out how to make a decent quality video at 50 kilobits a second. And that's way back, in generations of modems, back to 50 kilobits a second, because that's all they're going to have. And they're lucky if they got 2G, right? So you can't even have fancy browsers with fancy stuff going on the page. Yeah. And that's actually a great point, is it's going to be a whole different technology focus to solve problems for those billions of people that are going to come online. And watch sporting events on those devices, not likely. And you got to figure out broadcast over cellular. People are working on that. But even then, you got to figure out how do you do it at 50 kilobits a second for the people that are lucky, to have that. So that's a whole separate problem. Really important. The other issue you mentioned is governments that do censorship, and there are very big governments that do that, and that's a big problem. As a global company, we have to respect the laws in every country where we work. So in China, anybody who wants to have, any of our customers wants to have their content on our servers in country to get better performance, they've got to have their own license with the Chinese government. In China, we're not allowed to own our own hardware because it's illegal for a foreign company to own assets inside China doing what we do. And you can see why. We carry a lot of content they don't want to have distributed inside China. So there's all sorts of special things we have to do to operate there. Very complicated. Of course, of our history, we've been thrown out of the country twice. One time, it was as simple as one of our licensed customers had a picture of Tiananmen Square on their website that was on one of our servers. And they weren't supposed to do that, but they did it, and we can't tell that it's there. But we have a Chinese-based competitor. And what they do is they monitor everything they can coming off of our servers, going everywhere. They found it, and literally it went to the premier's desk. And that's a big deal over there. And, first wanted to know who we could shoot from Akamai. So not so good. Now, at the end of the day, we were able to work things out where they just shot our company there. And took us many millions of dollars and many years, and we created another offshore entity that works with partners there. But very hard, doing a business like content distribution with China. Now today the Chinese government is a customer. We distribute their content. We did the Chinese Olympics. But it's dicey, and even the laws aren't clear. There's different levels of government, and it's very hard for Western companies, to work there. And we don't have any solution to that. I wish we did.
Thank you for the answer, and thank you for the talk as well.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Alexandra Babutsaki. I'm a fourth-year PhD student working in human-computer interaction. My question is more on the higher level on the internet, because you mentioned all these challenges that are about, the infrastructure and the systems perspective. But obviously, as a human-computer interaction researcher, I have more of higher level questions. So my research is on webcam eye tracking, and every time I present my work, I have two different lines of reactions. Companies that immediately see the potential, they're like, oh wow, that's perfect. I can see where a user is looking, for example, when they're on their laptop or on their mobile device, and I can do so many things, like I can personalize their search, their news, I can mitigate, for example, help people with motor impairments. They see only the positive aspect. And then you have users that immediately they're like, why would I allow someone to have access on my webcam and see what I'm doing the whole time? It's one thing giving your access to your cursor, for example, patterns, but a totally different thing giving access to your face and your surroundings, right? So I don't know how you envision internet leading the way as a unity when you have so different stakeholders. You have companies and you have users. Everyone in theory wants to collaborate, but you have so many different perspectives and different benefits.
Yeah, privacy is a really complicated thing. On the one hand, everything's on Facebook anyway, and also probably there's a bunch of governments reading it anyway if they want to because of all these loopholes that we talked about. But everybody really worries about privacy. Our approach is that we consider it sacred. In fact, at one point we did have an advertising business where we would create cookie-based profiles of a user. We wouldn't know their name or address, but we would, based on what they were viewing, with permission from the sites they were going to, so we had that permission from the sites, create a profile of the user, then use that to target advertising, and use that for what's called retargeting. So we would know if you went to a car site and designed a car. You painted it green and you put these hubcaps on and stuff. And so then if you went somewhere else, we would know, and we might show you an ad with that car you made. So very targeted and personalized advertising. Click here to go back to the site. Actually, people thought it was pretty spooky. Great technology. But then, we decided probably that's not a good business for us to be in. Because of the privacy issues. It was illegal in Europe. Here is perfectly legal. The sites, the transaction between a user and a site is jointly owned by the law. At least depending in this country, it's jointly owned. So you own, if you go to Facebook, you own it, and Facebook owns it. And now there's ethics around that about, do you have to opt into certain things? Is it opt out? And we decided ultimately we just didn't want to be there, even with permissions, even though it was legal, that we just didn't want to mess with that stuff. So we don't track any of that stuff anymore. And the only thing we'll do is if you're committing malicious activity, we will track that. So that if you are trying to hack into a site based on your IP address today and maybe someday based on your device, we'll flag that to block or alert if our customers want to when you go to other sites. And generally, even in Europe, that's broadly construed to be okay and to be ethical. That if you're using it purely for security purposes to block attacks, that's considered to be okay today, and that's all we do today.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marcelo Martins. I'm a sixth-year PhD student here at Brown. Work with Rodrigo Fonseca, do energy management on mobile devices. First of all, thank you for the talk. My question is, we understand that what Akamai other CDN networks, they install middle boxes to transparently enable or facilitate a distribution caching of data over network. I think we're all aware of the benefits, but I think one primary concern here is the fact that we have the actual black boxes in the middle of the network. So I think we raised concerns here. One of them were privacy. The other one, I would say, would be availability. And I have two questions with regards to these issues. One of them is, we're all experts. We know that maybe sometimes when a site goes down, it could be Akamai's fault, it could be the ISP fault or the service. I guess the end user, lay end user, doesn't know about that. So if your e-commerce site goes down for any reason, let's say for any problem with Akamai's network, then the fault would be on the e-commerce provider. The reason being that because it's a transparent service, that the end user doesn't know about it.
Right.
So the question is, what kind of guarantees does Akamai, or what kind of responsibility Akamai would hold in these kind of situations? Because there is a loss. You can see that the Akamai can come out cleanly because the user doesn't know about it, but obviously it's going to be held responsible by the contractor. And the second question is along these lines. So far, we have the Akamai strategies to deploy these middle boxes or black boxes in the middle network, so ISPs, content providers. During your talk, you mentioned about bringing this into the homes of people. And once again, as we said, we have examples of local providers or ISPs, they deploying their own CDNs, or Facebook, for example, is another very good example. Aren't you afraid that there's going to be the same implications for users, even though we're getting more aware of security issues and privacy? Isn't there going to be any kind of backlash if users, they start to know that, we still have, we're going to have the same problem here. We have a black box in our house. We don't know what's going on. We have the service. There are the benefits, but what kind of implications that would cause to Akamai, and what kind of transparency, or are there any transparency and ideas how to change the policy, how Akamai provides its services?
Okay, so so if we screw up and bring down, pick your favorite commerce site, they are certainly going to know. And because we'll tell them and they'll figure it out. And obviously they're not happy about it. And we have an SLA with them, and there can be, we can make all sorts of legal things can happen. Now, our whole goal, of course, is to make the site be much more reliable, which we do, and that their business increases because they use us. Now, in 2004, we did have a network incident that more or less brought down, most of our customers for about 45 minutes, and made headlines, at the time. Very bad, for us to have that happen. And we've, been religious about how do you make a platform where the software is constantly changing, involving billions of users and, millions of domains, so it never goes down. And we've had a that's a whole engineering of systems challenge on its own. But we've been successful that way. Now, we do have incidents where something fouls up with a particular customer. That happens. They might put in the wrong metadata controls. That's what controls the usage of their site. They might screw it up. Or one of our technicians might screw up a change for a site that causes a problem. And then we have to work with the customer about it. Sometimes they'll blame us publicly. Usually we get blamed things publicly where it wasn't our fault. There were some recent big examples where, big famous companies had issues and they were known to do business with us, but it wasn't our fault. And, we don't say anything, about it because we don't want to throw them under the bus. They're a big customer and, so it's more that's the case that we have to deal with. And it's very frustrating, to get blamed in the press for something that we didn't do. In fact, may have even cautioned against doing something because it'll lead to failure. They do it anyway, and then, we're on the hook for it publicly. Now, with the software in the home, it's the context there is it's not maybe even your device. In some cases, you don't own the cable modem. The network does. And you're not really responsible for what it's doing or what's on it. So it's not like it's something where you could be held responsible, where you had a choice with what's there and that we're spying on it. It's not like that. It's just something that is making the fabric work better. Okay? And so I think in that context, a lot safer. Now that said, today we've got probably 150 million end users have given us explicit permission by checking the EULA to put our software on their device so we can do peer-assisted delivery or client-assisted delivery. So we already are doing that at 150 million is small scale compared to where we want to be. But the idea here is that it's not even on a device you're thinking about. It's just the device that makes things work well, lowers your cost, gives you higher quality, and that's how the system works.
Clarification though. 150 million users have checked the box.
Mm-hmm.
How come I was never asked to check the box?
Oh, you might have just done it not even paying attention. They're mostly, the people that do that are electronic gaming software. So that's there's probably 50 million there. And maybe you don't have electronic games that you do frequently. And the rest would be live video.
I'll explain.
All right, so maybe if you don't do either of those on the web, then you wouldn't have checked the EULA.
Oh, thank you.
I'm Irina Calciu. I'm a PhD student here. I work with Morris Hurley on parallel computing and distributed systems. And my question is, now assuming that we have that video in the homes and it works at high quality over IP, it seems that the internet is much better than that, so we could do even more. So how do you think the interaction will change once we have that video and the capability? I mean, the internet is also collecting data back and has the ability of sending data and completely changing the interaction between the user and the video that they're watching, right? So my question is, how is this interaction going to change? And also, what technology do we need in order to be able to face that challenge?
Well, okay, so there is the technology today, it's not always used, that allows the video player at the user in the home to communicate with the server in the internet that's delivering the stream. And it can say, hey, I'm getting packet loss, make the stream come at a lower bit rate, and then the picture might get a little less crisp. Sometimes what happens is it doesn't have that capability and it just rebuffers, and it pauses, or sometimes you'll get jitter. But there is, and we do a lot of technology on the player side, in the home, that can make the experience seem a lot better. And so those are areas that are important, I think, for research. Also, video compression, is an important area. Now, I don't know if that's exactly your question. Did I get it, or maybe not?
Well, so I was thinking more of a future world where we don't just watch the video, but also kind of somehow participate in it. Maybe we want to focus on a particular part of a soccer game. We want to see.
So there is a lot of capability, multiple camera views, second screen viewing. There's stuff now where, you like what the actress is wearing. You can, on your device that's following along, you can click on that, find out where to buy the dress. There's going to be shows coming out that are with a show online, only online, with a show is sponsored by a fashion company. And so all the characters will be wearing clothes from the store. And there's no ads, but on your device you can click as you see things you like and then connect you to the store and you can buy them online. So there are going to be changes in how we watch video. There's a lot of experimenting going on there.
Thank you.
All right, we're opening to the floor.
Could I ask one more question?
Yes.
Excellent. It's coming from the microphone.
Yeah, sure.
Well, it is a Sweatbox, so I thought I'd just ask a direct, maybe mean question.
Oh, yeah. Am I sweating enough?
Excellent. So you mentioned that you have the ability to track users for security reasons if you think that maybe they're doing something bad. Has Akamai ever been approached by the NSA to use or misuse this for any purposes?
No, we weren't involved in the whole Snowden thing. And that's because we don't have the stuff they're most interested in. So we're not doing email and stuff like that. We don't do the texting generally. So we're not a target for that kind of thing.
So then outside of the ignoring just sort of mass surveillance, has Akamai ever been approached to target people or to yeah?
Yeah, no, we don't target. Now, the FBI can, with a warrant, say to any company, say, hey, there's criminal activity, we've got a warrant, we have to see logs on this. And if we can reasonably produce the logs, which often we can't, but if we can, then we have a legal obligation to turn it over. And that
has that happened?
Yes, that's happened. And that's happened in other countries as well, where there's from a court order that there's logs that we have to turn over to the government. That's not NSA, but that's FBI as part of criminal investigations, and we have to respect the laws in any country where we do business.
Thank you.
I wonder if you can say whether some of the technology or algorithm development in the area of optimization, network design, or scheduling have influenced what's gone on under the hood.
Oh yeah, it's all theory algorithms based. Michelle Gomans did some great work on our global load balancing based on advancement on stable marriage. Danny's thesis, Danny Lewin is my graduate student, co-founded Akamai. His thesis was on consistent hashing, which is a protocol that we use to, within a collection of servers in one place, decide what to store where in a very efficient manner that's very helpful to us. So the underpinnings of what we do is highly algorithmic, and that originally comes from theory. So if you do algorithms theory, that's the stuff that makes a lot of the workings under the hood be very effective for us.
Is that if the NSF could use these war stories to justify the continued support of theory? I know you're.
No, I'm happy to do that. I have from time to time, sent letters or talked to folks, but happy to be, a witness, to testify that this is important stuff. We used multi-commodity, flow in the early days, and ultimately that became too expensive to do in a very large-scale distributed environment, and that's when we switched to stable marriage-based approach. But theory work is very important.
There's a microphone in the middle.
So I guess this microphone is for tall people. So I guess my question is, you had discussed your patent case and how it was set up so that the patent had 5 steps, and if 4 are handled by one person, the 5th is by another, then it's not violating it, maybe. Do you think that there's some way to define an atomic unit of a patent?
Yeah, I think the unit is the claim. And the original way the law was interpreted was that if the second entity doing that 5th step, if they were doing that under the direction and control of the entity doing the first 4, then the entity doing the first 4 was liable. It was infringing. And then what happened was the appeals court, for reasons that make no sense to me, said, no, that's not good enough. And that's what's being battled out now back and forth between the Federal Appeals Court and the Supreme Court is what is the right language there. And just to show you this is the catch-22 in the legal system. What happened was in the appeals court and then the second level of that, they decided, they got all the judges in the entire appeals court together. It's very rare because our case was, important more broadly. And what they said was we can't agree on what the wording should be about the entity doing the fifth step. But we do agree that Akamai's been wronged here and that they should prevail. And so because they couldn't agree on the basics, they said, here's this other way Akamai can win. That it was what's called inducement, that the entity doing the first 4 steps induced the entity doing the 5th step. And so we thought, oh, great, because we thought we clearly directed and controlled, you induced. Well, we didn't know that these all have technical terms, and it turns out with the way the laws are, you can't get to inducement before you prove infringement, which was the whole thing they couldn't decide on. And that's what went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, you bozos, clearly they didn't induce because you didn't establish infringement, so they went 9-0, sending it back down. And so now they're trying to deal with what does it mean to infringe? What are the rules there? And so that'll go through another few rounds probably. Yeah.
Hi. So you talked about preloading content in user devices, sort of predicting what kind of content they would next want. So what level of accuracy do you expect, or would you need for everything to sort of seamlessly work? Yeah,
that's a great question. We have some things in beta now around videos, predicting the videos you want, and then when your phone is in Wi-Fi, like at night, or you're in a down cellular time, then we'll put those videos there. You can indicate preferences, but also tries to see what you're doing and predict it. And it's very early stages, so I would say it's a mixed bag. For me, it can tell I like the Red Sox and foreign exchange rates. And so it got that, but it also gives me a lot of stuff I don't like. Now, with making it fast for doing a transaction, that's in research stage right now. And so we don't know how well we're going to do there. And if you got folks here working on predictive stuff, we'd be interested.
Hi. So two non-technical things. One is, so as a public figure, you're a CEO of a major company. The claim about Facebook, all the information's out there anyway. I think we have to be careful about these claims we make about privacy, because there's a lot of research that shows that people actually are quite careful, and even what looks like oversharing is not actually oversharing. So
fair enough.
Especially in youth. So Dana Boyd's book, for example, makes clear that we've got all these wild claims about youth, and in fact, youth change and do all sorts of very careful things. So just as a
fair enough. Fair enough.
So because you're in the Sweatbox. So, but the question for you is related to some questions that several other people have asked, but maybe I want to try to phrase it differently. Does Akamai have some kind of principle about how we think of ourselves as a common carrier? We think of is that a Hippocratic oath of some sort, or what is the guiding principle as you have to make decisions for every company and for every government on these sort of privacy kinds of issues, privacy and intrusion issues?
Yes, we are not a common carrier. I have nothing to do with that. But we do have really core principles, and it is sacred to protect the privacy of the end user and our customer, which is the website. Okay, so we don't want that data to go anywhere except where it's supposed to be. Now we do release aggregate data, so overall e-commerce trends, things like that can't be tied back to a specific customer or a specific user. There's also, it's really important for us to never deliver the wrong content. That's a huge thing, like the prime directive, never deliver the wrong content and keep things private. And I would say those are the two major ones. Another important one for us, which is odd for a company like us, is we have a acceptable use policy. So it says that we will not do illegal gambling. We will not do sites that are clearly focused on adult content. Now, that doesn't mean, there's HBO, things like that have adult content, but that's not their focus, and we support that, obviously. So we're not out there as, the policing stuff. We're not policing it, but things that clearly we think, go beyond any reasonable threshold, we don't associate ourselves with. There's certain kinds of things which, in this country, we would consider terrorism. That we don't support, and it gets really complicated there because, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. You've heard that expression, and we've had complicated situations in the past where, we would make a decision, not to take on a certain customer where there is a part of the world that thinks that is perfectly legitimate journalism. And there was a time around 9/11 where that happened, where we were concerned that we didn't want to be a party to a mechanism that could be used to instigate a terrorist attack. And so we made a very difficult decision to not take a customer. We got sued overseas for it. Ultimately, had to pay, for the decision in an overseas court. So, so we do, and most carriers say, hey, anything goes. And so, we've not wanted to do that.
So my question is that you mentioned that basically internet is built on TCP and IP. But in the same time, I feel like TCP and IP was even born before I was. So they're pretty old. And basically Akamai's solution to that, we all know that TCP and IP, they're good, but sometimes they're not good, especially in regard of security and efficiency. So Akamai's solution is to basically add more layers on top of TCP and IP, because you mentioned that you build virtual internet on top of that. But I'm wondering, is there any other ways to improve the whole stack, especially if we think about it, like the internet is evolving a lot, but at the bottom of the stack, there are old technologies and
Right, so we do, in some sense, we do a lot of TCP optimization, but we also build on top of UDP in ways that doesn't use TCP at all. And it will, in fact, not even just use one route, but it'll use multiple routes, with forward error correction and stuff. So totally different than TCP. So we really want to think of us as building on top of UDP for the protocols.
Two very quick questions, perhaps. One, with regard to individual tracking, does privacy mean opt out or opt in? And, well, you can go.
Well, so we'll only do that, and today it's at the IP address level for security purposes. Now,
okay, so no, I thought you said that there was tracking
before?
to try to predict movie preferences and things like that.
Ah, yes. Okay. So that is, if you are a subscriber for the service, that would be an opt-in service. So you'd have to opt in to have that.
Okay. And the second one, how much do you know about the variability and malleability of patients regarding things like loading times across cultures?
That's a good question. So offhand, I don't know of us, that we've done a study cross cultures.
The 11 seconds data that you gave us is for the United States, right?
That's for Walmart, which is mostly in the U.S. for that data. The thresholds obviously differ, into different environments.
Well, we've seen them change enormously over time.
Right.
And if they change over time, in principle, they could change across cultures.
Right.
On the other hand, each culture has access to fast loading times in some settings. So maybe there's more contagion than there is over time.
Right. And the vast majority of our business is in the developed world today for the obvious reasons.
So you talked a lot about static content. You mentioned dynamic content a little bit, and you also talked mostly about bandwidth, most of the problems. But a lot of content is dynamic, and for example, every web page, the web is a big advertising platform, right? 90% of Google's revenue is coming from ads. And these have the property that you have to record the interaction and send them back to a central place so that you can do billing, you can do targeting, and all those things. So what are the limits of what can you push to the edge? What are the limits? What will never be pushed to the edge? And what are the advancements there?
Yeah, so actually, all the commerce sites, banking sites, all the enterprise sites are totally dynamic. And there's very little caching you can do. So there, to speed things up, you're relying on the protocols, to use different protocols, different routes, figure out special things to do with the cellular devices. And so that's not so much caching. Caching is more useful for big video, where everybody's watching the same thing, and it's a giant file. Big software delivery. Actually, today, our biggest traffic, the biggest days, are still driven by software releases. And every little app you put on your device, that's a chunk of software that's getting downloaded. I think that'll change soon as broadcast TV starts moving online. But yeah, so there's the static caching part is the easy part in some sense. It's all the other stuff when you have dynamic sites for transactions. It's much harder to do.
So 2 questions. One is, what, if anything, is Akamai doing to promote IPv6 adoption? And the second is, you mentioned that there, in the upcoming year, going to be increased offerings for video streaming services. Are those cases where content providers have reached out to you and said, we'd like to offer more services, or are those cases where you've said, hey, we know there's a bunch of end users who would like video, we'll help you get it to them?
The former. The broadcasters are now all abuzz with, deconstructing the packaging you get with the traditional mechanisms, and that's driven by the guys that have the big, best content. And it will probably hurt the little channels, when this happens, they sort of get included now and get paid. But the shift, the debundling shift is coming. The move of broadcast online is, I think, going to come this year. Now we'll see if you buy it, and that'll tell us a lot. But it's coming from the industry side, I think. IPv6, we are big fans of. We cooperate with Google and Microsoft and a couple of other companies with IPv6 Day, trying to increase awareness. I think now about 0.5% of the traffic is coming over IPv6. We support it. We make it work for our customers that don't want to upgrade. It's grown over the last few years from 1/3% to 0.5%. So, I think it's probably still 10 years before you get a majority. V4 space is going away. You got to buy it now. We want V6 because, we buy a lot of IP addresses. To do SSL, the whole world's moving to SSL, and to do SSL, we have to have a different IP address for every website in every region. And that means we got to have a ton of IP addresses. Now, eventually, there's going to be new versions of SSL that also are taking forever to get adopted because you have all these legacy browsers that don't go away, that don't support the new things. And so if we switch to the new things, we just wiped out 5% of the internet. And that's not acceptable. So it's taking forever, but we push it.
So in addition to caching, does Akamai also do content-specific compression of any sort? Like, I was thinking about your Indian media giant, right? If you figure out a compression for cricket, you'd be raking it in. I was like,
yeah, we did the cricket championships this year for Star.
I know, I used it, yeah.
In India. And now, if you used it, you would have known in the early games we had struggles. And it turns out there were certain technical things that weren't provisioned right in India. We did get it squared away before we got to the later rounds, and they tell me anyway, my guys tell me that it went okay. The customers seemed happy by the end, in India. But yeah, we did huge traffic, and India does not have a lot of infrastructure, so we were very concerned, and we were worried, to be honest, if India got to the finals, that in India, that'd be a problem with the Indian infrastructure, because as well deployed as we are, We need to be a lot farther out to be able to do it. And that's a challenge area in the emerging countries. And I think it's a great topic here. How do you get a high-quality video, or maybe it's not going to be high quality, an okay enough video at 50 kilobits a second? That's not where the media industry is looking. They're 4K. They're saying 4K is not good enough because it's only 32 frames a second. But how do you solve that? Because that'll bring billions of people online if you can do that.
All right, let's thank this.
Thank you very much.